It's really my privilege today to welcome Andrew Yang, a man who I think we all know, the breakout candidate of the 2020 presidential election, a candidate for mayor of New York City, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and now the founder of a new political party, the Party of Forward. And Andrew, I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think it is time for a new political party. I think that not just because that's what I would like to see, but because based on everything we know about how American history works and political party evolution, that all the conditions are right now to see a new party emerge. So there's a huge opportunity here. And I think that we're very likely to see two parties that are very, very different from the ones that we've known very soon in the future. And it may very well be the Forward Party if it could seize this opportunity that could emerge. So I guess my first question to you, Andrew, is why do you believe that we need a new party in the first place? What is it that you saw that you could see that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, as they're currently organized, the problems that they can't or won't address, that you're hoping that Forward can and will?
Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you, American Purpose, Braver Angels. A huge fan of your organizations. And Frank, you wrote a book on this. It's amazing. You know, the Great Realignment, indeed. I came to this case the hard way, which was by a combination of experience and looking at works like yours and others. I believe in trying to be honest with myself first and foremost, you know what I mean? And so I ran for president, came back off the trail, and then dug into why I didn't feel like things were going to work out that well for the US moving forward. It's like I had this sinking feeling. And so when I started to dig in, I realized our system's actually not designed to work. Our system's designed to lead us to division, political violence, and worse. And that's where we're heading. And so when you see that that's the case, then you think, okay, what is needed is a dynamic change. And your work suggests this too. It's so wild, Frank. It's like, if you were an entrepreneur and you showed up to a marketplace and it had two vendors and 62% of people wanted an alternative to those two vendors, you would start a new provider immediately, you know, like no matter what the industry. It's just in politics, we are prevented from actually having a third offering by the two people that right now are in power, the two parties that are in power. And so it's like an irresistible force meeting an immovable object, but the anger just keeps getting higher and higher. The dysfunction just keeps getting higher and higher. And people are casting about for a solution. You can see Trump certainly as a manifestation of that. In my opinion, you can see Obama over Hillary as a manifestation of that. Bernie's outsized success and near victories in the last two races. People have just been desperate for answers for years and years, and the duopoly hasn't been able to provide them. You have this divided media landscape where you literally have two versions of reality at this point. I had a conversation with a reporter named Derek Thompson, and we talked about something fascinating and horrifying that I will share with you all. Which is that at this point, your perception of the economy is based upon your feelings about who's in the White House, where right now Democrats have a 49-point more positive estimation of the economy than Republicans, and it was 47 points more Republican in October 2019 when Trump was in office. So at this point, the partisanship has overridden our sense of reality itself. It's a very dark time in American life. So when you try to come to grips with what this means, you realize that the duopoly needs to evolve, advance, get reformed, get replaced, get disrupted. And when you come to grips with that point and you're Andrew Yang, and then you think, okay, I'm actually on the list of maybe the top, I don't know, 10, 12 Americans who could credibly make a case for a third party movement. And then you think, well, then I should make this case. But it's because I believe it to be true. first and foremost. I like the people that have supported me over the last number of years. I feel like I just owe them the truth.
Okay, so that's great. Let's start with that, with your assessment of problems, because I really enjoyed your book. And one of the things that struck me was the case that I thought you were making when you were looking at the problems of America was of institutional failure pretty much everywhere. Whether it not just being politics and government, but also the media, also Silicon Valley, also corporate America. And that you had seen sort of a failure of our institutions and a failures of our leaders pretty much across the board. So why don't we start there? Why do you think that's happening? And why do you think our existing parties can't handle it?
I think America is experiencing something of a leadership void or vacuum nowadays. And the reasons are that the market forces are so dominant now that in order to succeed in just about any field or industry at this point, you have to cater to what the market wants. If you're a politician, you have to give the cable news networks and your social media following what they want. If you're a tech company, you have to try and give your shareholders what they want. And so then when you turn around and try and make a case that's not a part of market incentives, then no one will believe you, because they'll look at you and say, wait a minute, you've just been playing ball for X years, and that's why you're a billionaire, Mark Zuckerberg. That's why, you're like at the top of where you are, senator or whatever it is. And so you look around and say, okay, who's actually going to be able to make a principled stand that is not consistent with market forces, whatever industry they're in? And if someone does try and make a principled stand against market forces, by the way, they get cast out, they have their career ended, they get cast into the wilderness. That's where we are in American life now. So when you ask why people haven't been able to stand up to it, it's because the market forces are so predominant now in every walk of life. I mean, even the things that we regard as deeply personal, let's say our friendships, now just have numbers attached to them. You know what I mean? Like you can just be like, how many likes did I get? It's really awful. I'm a 46-year-old man. I resisted social media for a long time until I ran for president, and then was like, okay, I guess I need to get on Twitter. Like that's what my publisher is telling me, et cetera, et cetera. And now you can quantify everything, and it's really dark. And our young people are growing up with this, by the way. It's one reason why they're so depressed. So, an artist talked about the sanding down of the human experience because of the streamers and algorithms. That's true at this point. You can monetize culture, you can monetize art, you can monetize beliefs, politics, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we are right now. Is there enough popular will to try and recast this system that isn't just going to be, frankly, just lashing out of anger? I hope so. I'm going to say that the group of people on the Zoom today embody this, really. Like I instinctively believe that you're reflective, you're principled, you're rational, you try to be optimistic even in the face of very dark times. How many of us are there? Can you build a movement of 10 million Americans who see things the same way? It's certainly out there for the taking, which I know Frank knows by the numbers. I mean, if 62% of Americans want an alternative to the duopoly, then, that's very, very fertile. The problem right now is that, again, the incentives all are toward the major parties in terms of votes, media, and money. And so the question is, can you build a new pillar of votes, media, and money for a new party? And then the other corruptive element too is like, do you need a billionaire to do that? And then if you get that billionaire, then does the party immediately become corrupted by market incentives because everyone's like, oh, this is just Bloomberg's thing or whatever the hell, and then like no one believes in it anymore. So there's this very strange dynamic that you have to try and overcome. Now, I've had some success in my brief political career making a case that ordinarily would require tens of millions of dollars to make, and then getting the excitement level up to a point where that tens of millions of dollars was provided by everyday Americans giving 20 to 30 bucks each. Now that was a bit of lightning in a bottle, but I think that there's a need to do something like that again right now, and also get some of the folks and institutions that have high levels of resources in on the fact that right now our government is set up to fail, us and each other. And we need an alignment, to the title of your book's point.
Well, let me give you, because okay, so when you're focusing on, there's all the institutional problems to build a party. But so I'm going to give you, I'm going to take the other side of this to be a little more hopeful, because for one reason. All right. So when you came into the presidential nomination in 2020, nobody had heard of you, right? You had none of the normal markers of a presidential candidate. So that's why a lot of people at the beginning, they're like, who is this guy? And yet, very quickly, you emerged as one of the major candidates, which was probably one of the most remarkable political stories. And I, at the time, was watching it. And so, okay, well, why is this? Why is this guy? He's not a senator. He hasn't been in politics for a long time. Nobody had heard of him. And I thought it was your message. And the message was, you were talking about new problems. You were saying, essentially, that we had an industrial government, we have a society that's based around the industrial economy, the mid-20th century economy. We have parties that have these assumptions. And now we live in a post-industrial America and a new world, and we have all these new problems that nobody's dealing with. And you were the only guy up there that was talking about the new problems. And everybody else was talking about the same stuff that we talked about for the last 50 years. And that message was so exciting to people that you became a major candidate. And that parties are really about ideas. That, once the ideas are in place, all of the mechanics and money and all that matters a lot. But we forget that, 80% of the votes are decided before anybody starts, because they already know what the parties represent. But so people care about the ideas, and that if you have the right ideas, you can get something going. And so that's why I thought what you were doing was so interesting, and particularly what you're doing right now. And so how much have you focused on the intellectual entrepreneurship of giving America something new to believe in?
Yeah, I think you're right. And many of the ideas that I ran on have now been incorporated into other parties or other people's platforms, which makes me happy. Like, I don't have any sense of ownership or proprietorship. This is actually a really interesting question for me, Frank. I want to unpack this for a minute. So when I was running for president, I had a clear vision. I had, I don't know, like 150 plus policies on my website saying, look, here are some problems and here are ways we can solve them. And it got people excited. Mm-hmm. And then the Democrats won. And I have to say, I really shifted gears from making a case for those ideas, in large part because some of those ideas had been picked up by other people, and I was like, okay, it's fine, and in some ways too, it's like I actually want to relinquish those ideas, because it's probably not helpful for everyone to think, oh, this is an Andrew Yang thing. If a dozen other organizations are like, we should start looking at cash relief for people, then I'm like, well, great. I can let it go and try and focus on something else. And I've become fixated on the problems that you wrote about around the dysfunction of the duopoly. Now, one of the struggles is, can you talk about the dysfunctional duopoly every week for a year? That's not really that interesting.
You got to have a positive, right? You can't just say the system isn't working. You have to also say, and we can make it better.
Yeah.
And so here's what we can do. Here's our ideas on how to fix things that are broken.
Yes. And so this is one of the struggles that one has, where if you're going to focus on trying to reform the system, then it's tough to take a stance on myriad issues, because then you'll end up naturally falling into one camp or the other in terms of fairly divisive social issues and the rest of it. Like I believe very strongly in some of these issues, but I believe also that if we don't make a change from the duopoly, none of it matters. And so when you ask about the vision for the Forward Party, we've been very specific. We've been very specific around democracy reform, with that being the message that everyone hopefully can get excited about. It's like, look, if you're like far left, far right, somewhere in between, you just have to agree that the duopoly is not working, and then we can make common cause and try to make some of the structural changes. Is that the right approach? I genuinely am not sure. And that's one reason why I'm interested in having this conversation. There's part of me that wants to just take the same list of policies that I ran on before and just be like, here it is, we're going to do this again. But I'm not sure if that's a better approach.
Well, so let me get your reaction to this. So, one thought that I've had a lot is that a lot of what we interpret as sort of partisanship or resentment is in reality frustration at a vacuum, where people are getting angry and they're looking for someone to blame. But what they're mad about is that we have all these new problems because the world is changing very rapidly around us and nobody's dealing. And people are feeling like they're getting left behind and they're getting frustrated. And so they're finding villains to blame for the problem. And we look at that, and we interpret it as resentment and partisanship, and people are angry at each other, when it's actually a vacuum. What people are actually mad about is that nobody is solving those problems. And that if somebody was solving the problems, a lot of the anger would dissipate, and that the solution may be easier than we think by actually offering people a compelling agenda. And you can think of it sort of like the New Deal. What was going on in the New Deal, right? People were it was the Depression. People were terrified. The world had fallen apart. America had sort of collapsed. And there was a real thought that we could lose the Republic because, there was communism and fascism were gaining support because people thought democracy didn't work because the country had been mired in this problem. And people were really angry. And when FDR came up with the New Deal, which was more than just a group of policies, it was an idea that said, I have an approach to solve these problems that you're upset about. The temperature came down because people felt like, okay, somebody's handling it. So that was sort of, I guess, a statement, but I kind of want your reaction to that, because I guess there's two questions, because there's one approach that says the way to solve this is by fixing the system, but the other the way to solve this is by offering people hope of a new agenda to solve their problems.
Yeah, I do think we need a New Deal. I think we need to try and get people galvanized around solutions. The struggle is that trust is so low now. And so even if you open with the fact that you want the government to do X, Y, Z, like a number of Americans at this point will shut that off because they'll be like, oh, more government, bigger government, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that's what's needed. I don't know how bad things are going to get before we start turning in that direction. I was with a very famous comedian last week, and he said that COVID has changed people. And he did not mean it in a good way. I talked to colleague whose mother works in furniture retail, and she said that people are just so short and nasty and aggrieved now. And so in that environment, if you come in as the solutions group, will there be people that respond to it? I do want to speak to something here, Frank, and this was a learning I got from the trail, and I don't know if I've over applied it. We'll see. So one of the learnings I got from the trail is that all politics is tribal at this point, and that you think you're arguing on policy, but it turns out that people's policy viewpoints and their self-identified politics are actually not the same. You know, and that people have essentially just gotten assigned into like a blue team and a red team, and then told who to cheer for, and then that's America in a nutshell right now. And so one of my goals with the Forward Party is to create this new positive, unifying, solutions-oriented political language, and then let people know it's like, look, you don't have to be mad. You don't have to hate other Americans. You know, you can feel good about yourself in the future in the face of very significant challenges, in the hopes that this new language would provide a way forward for people and a way to feel good about yourself, your country, your fellow Americans. Now, I joke about having over-applied that in the sense that, you know, when I was running for president, I was leading with policy. And then what happened was, if you had a policy like universal basic income, then people translated that into values of a certain kind. And then this time we're trying to lead a little bit more the other way by saying, like, look, we're going to be positive. We're going to be unifying. We are all love your fellow human beings, love your fellow Americans, and hope that that's what people want and are missing right now. Because so much of our politics right now is so negative. Like, you know, you listen to either side for 5 minutes and like they you know, they just end up lambasting the other side. Like I've been joking that the best argument for each party at this point is the other party. They just keep bringing that up. And I, you know, I think that, by the way, that's going to lead us to disaster. So can we be optimistic and then lead people toward better solutions? I hope so.
Well, let me ask this then. So okay, let's say that in 2022, 2024, you win some elections, all right? Let's say that you come into Congress and you have 12 new representatives, 2 senators, a governor, a lieutenant governor. So what do they do then? What's your thought of, so now we've got these people elected, they're elected on the Forward Party. What happens next? What's your vision for what happens next?
Well, gosh, they would bring the temperature of the country down really quickly, because you'd have the two sides who would be clashing, and then both of them would need the Forward Party if your numbers check out in order to actually pass anything. And so you'd end up.
Do they have an agenda of that they're all cooperating on? I know ranked choice voting and all this is part of it, but beyond that, do they have sort of a vision that they're working? Or are they all working independently? How do you see that happen?
Yeah, the goal is that they establish a set of measurements and benchmarks and say, look, we should be trying to improve people's quality of life, whether that's health, education, environment, things that most people can agree on.
Human-centered capitalism, which I thought was a brilliant idea. Actually, can you talk about that? Because that was I thought that was the big idea in your book, and you didn't spend a lot of time on it, but it was kind of really a really interesting idea.
Oh, thank you, Frank. The point is that our economic measurements will keep getting better even as our quality of life degrades. And right now, the United States is 28th at last measurement in terms of infant mortality, life expectancy, clean air and clean water, public education. So that's where, in my view, a lot of the anger is coming from, is that the true fact is that America's quality of life is not great, certainly nothing close to what it should be based upon our wealth and resources. And then we just keep staring at the stock market and GDP growth and this one unemployment measure and say, oh, that's the economy. So my fundamental argument is that we're actually the economy. The economy is a construct that we invented to make our lives better, that we're not meant to be inputs into this thing. We're not meant to be its fuel. It's meant to be fueling our quality of life. And so if our quality of life is going down and the stock market's going up, you know, I think most Americans care much more about their own lives, particularly because about half of Americans don't own stocks anyway. And so if you have the wrong measurements, then you never make progress. And right now, our society has the wrong measurements.
Yeah, and there's so much going on right now that feeds, I'm thinking like the Great Resignation, or have you followed the Reddit community anti-work? Do you know about all that?
Oh, I know about the Great Resignation. I did not know about anti-work, but I guess I get the vibe based on the title.
Yeah, right. Well, it's just this growing Reddit community that's people have been writing about. I think Goldman Sachs wrote a memo about it because it's all these people who are just fed up with sort of the way they feel like they've been treated in the economy, and they want to pull themselves out of it. But the student loan, there's so many of these resentments people have, which all in some way come back to the feeling that the economy isn't working for them the way that they want, that they've worked hard and played by the rules, but they haven't got the reward that they thought they were supposed to get. And it reminds me a lot, actually, of the late 1800s populist revolt with the populist movement. That came out of a similar thing where we went from agricultural to industrial, and all the farmers who were the middle class were getting left behind, and they felt like the rules had changed. They worked hard and played by the rules, and they were getting left behind. And there were all these millionaires that were, Carnegie and Rockefeller. And so there was a big populist revolt. And what ended it was reform, that people got upset. And then you got Teddy Roosevelt and all of this. And it seems to be that to some degree, that's kind of what you're saying. And maybe that's the unifying message of your party.
I think we're overdue for some sort of populist revolt, and we're probably already seeing versions of it happen by the numbers. And you're also seeing a surge in deaths of despair, even pre-COVID. Our life expectancy declined the last 3 years pre-COVID. So how does this resolve itself? To your point about history, Frank, where is the populist revolt of today? I mean, I think that the populist revolt of today has been Bernie, Trump, and then what comes next. You are seeing some episodes. I'm not sure if you all saw online, 80 thieves descended on a mall in the Bay Area and just all ran in and started stealing things, and then drove out. They had 25 cars that were blocking traffic and whatnot. Where I looked at that and I was like, wow, that's like a high level of organization and a large number of people to get together on like a random weekend day just to go rob a mall. And so that struck me as something of the beginnings of a populist revolt, not to put too much anything political on what's clearly just larceny, group larceny, flash mob larceny. Right. But where does this energy go is to me one of the major questions. And our media, I see some chat questions about the media. Like the media is very much complicit in this, where in a past time, the media would be making a case about some of these economic inequities and be making common cause with certain groups of people in the working class. But today it's very, very much polarized and racialized, where certain issues will get very, very different treatment in the media than others, despite having very similar human impact.
Yeah. All right. So I see that because we're going to have to open this up to questions soon. So we're kind of starting to run low on time, and I've got a million things I'd love to talk to you about. But I guess I'll just ask you one sort of not really fun question, because it actually has some thoughts too, but sort of a philosophical question, just because I'm curious at what you'll say, which is, would you consider, so are you Rousseau or are you Locke? And what I mean by that, Rousseau representing the idea that people are inherently good, and that when things are going wrong, it's because of bad institutions and bad incentives. And if you remove those, good things will flourish. Or Locke, which is the idea, that you need these Madisonian protections, that people are inherently sort of disappointing, and that the goal is to stop people from doing the bad things, and then it just leaves the good things to sort of flourish. And, those two kind of ideas seem to compete with each other in America. And I think have a lot of, in the 20th century, kind of divided people and a lot in their politics. I'm just curious at which kind of more describes your worldview.
I thought you'd throw Hobbes in there too, as
with Locke.
the old, right? Like nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. Yeah, Hobbes lock, right? Oh, but also
hopefully we could avoid the Hobbesian version.
agree.
I think that people will go where they're guided. People will go whether they're led. People will go where their incentives lie. If we had more incentives around being a certain type of person, you'd see more of that type of behavior. Right now, the major problem is that all of our incentives are to be an effective market actor and a bit of a jerk otherwise. And then we yell at you when you're being a jerk. And then you're like, wait a minute, like I'm being rewarded for stuff that kind of like leads me to jerkiness. And so we're getting stretched in different directions. We need to genuinely reward people for doing the right thing. And if you have that as your environment and give people a benefit of the doubt, then you'd see better behavior. If you put people in situations where it really is dog eat dog, then you will see the worst of people.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, and that's why political parties, I find, are really important, because when they're working right, they channel people into effective solutions. Even if you're a selfish person who's just trying to climb the ladder, right? If the party is working, the way you climb the ladder is you solve problems and help people. And if the parties are not structured right and they're not geared to actually solving problems, well, then corruption hits in because everyone gets selfish. And this is not to keep going history, but this is like the era of good feelings or the Gilded Age, where when politics starts to drift, and that's when all the corruption starts. But when the parties are actually built around ideas, then the way that people get ahead is they actually start working on those ideas and they get led to a productive end. And that's a huge opportunity for a new party to have the right ideas, to start channeling people into fixing stuff.
I do want to share with everyone, I think that we're in an historic time in terms of the opportunity for a third party, whether it's the Forward Party or some other movement, because we are careening towards either a Trump-Biden rematch or maybe like Trump-Kamala. And in either of those scenarios, I think any credible third-party movement starts out with 15 to 20% and goes from there. Ross Perot got 19.3% in 92, and there were happier times then, I'm going to suggest. So there's, it is the irresistible force and the immovable object, but something has to change in this country, because right now, if we just follow the tracks that we're on, we see it leads to disaster. Anyone clear-eyed can see where we are heading. And then the question is, are there enough people who want to change that trajectory? And if there are a bunch of us, what can we do? Those are the era-defining questions, and they are with us right now. I hate to say it, they're with us over the next 24 to 36 months.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with you 100%. That's why I'm hopeful that you're going to be the guy to lead us to that promised land. You're the one who stepped up to do it.
Well, I want to be part of the solution. I'll play whatever role seems to be most valuable and instrumental. I'm not particularly driven by any personal ambition, but I can see how I can contribute. But I do think that there's an historic opportunity that lies ahead.
I agree. All right. Since we're kind of low on time, I guess I hand this over to Luke.
Well, with that, we will go into the Q&A section in just a moment here. As people have questions, please feel free to raise your Zoom hands so we can call on you to vocalize your questions to Mr. Yang. We only ask that when you have a question, please keep it in the form of a question. And I promise you, every statement is possible to be phrased as a question. So raise those Zoom hands and I'll call on people shortly here. Andrew, I just wanted to say that I think I speak on behalf of multiple folks in this room in saying that I am very excited to see your forthcoming political treatise on the relevance of early modern political theory to the contemporary state of American politics. And I will be excited to see where you fall on the Bolingbroke versus Walpole question in English Republican political theory. So with that, let's go to a question from Bonnie Johnston. Bonnie, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Bonnie, you're muted.
I'm wondering about overcoming the obstacle of, oh, well, he'll never win anyway. So people default to their favored party versus jumping in for change and taking the chance and voting for a better candidate. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. That is, I think, the single biggest obstacle to overcome, truly. And it's one reason why ranked choice voting is the preferred starting point for changing the mechanics of our races, because then if you can vote for whomever you want and someone says, oh, the person can't win, it's like, well, then my vote will just go to the second person who you think of as the more credible candidate. But this spoiler effect has to go, because right now people are getting bullied into saying you have to cast your vote for this person because otherwise you're like wasting your vote or messing it up for this other candidate. So that's where the process comes in. I mean, we use a very archaic first past the post system. There's no reason to stick with it. You know, just say, look, more choice, like just have it so that you can vote for whomever you like. And if we can make that switch, Bonnie, then you can change everything, because people do want an alternative. They just, to your point, don't want to feel like they're throwing their vote away.
Let's go take a question from Arash Sayadi. Arash, you had written a question in here. It looks interesting, so please go ahead and ask it.
Thank you, Luke. So thank you for being here, Mr. Yang, and answering our questions. My question goes to some of the conversation that you had a little bit earlier. I've been reading your book, and I get the impression that the Forward Party's intent is really to change incentives in politics, not necessarily lead as a party. I may be mistaken, so I'm hoping you can clarify that for us. What is the purpose of the Forward Party? And then if it is in fact to change the incentives, how do you think you can bring about those changes?
Thanks, Arash. The purpose of the Forward Party is to help our democracy advance to a point where it's actually sustainable, resilient, genuinely representative, lowercase d democratic. And in my mind, that would mean that we have more than two parties or two choices. So the goal is to introduce better incentives, make it so that you can vote for whomever you like, make it so that even if the same person's in office, they are rewarded for trying to do something principled that serves the people rather than kowtow to a party leader they might not agree with in their hearts. And so the Forward Party itself is a group of people that's trying to make that set of changes. Now, if you ask me, hey, like, do I care more about changing the system so that it works, or that the Forward Party has tons of power? Like, I definitely care much more about the former. It's just that the question is, how do you fix the system without people, without a group? And you can't. So the Forward Party is a group that's trying to reform the system. And then if it successfully reforms the system, then I imagine the Forward Party would be like one of the beneficiaries, but there'd be lots of other beneficiaries. I'd say like any Democrat or Republican just sitting around wanting things to work better would be a beneficiary. Like anyone who's an independent who had a different point of view would be a beneficiary. So the goal truly is trying to amend the system.
Let's go to a question from Kimberly. Kimberly, please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Hello, Andrew. I was wondering about this trust issue that we have. We all know about it. And with Web 2, the platforms seem to dominate and maybe curtail how we feel or talk to each other, and certainly don't reward people for doing the right thing. How do you see Web 3 figuring into all of this in American politics?
Optimistically, Web 3 ends up leading to something less top-down, more egalitarian, more accessible. Will it live up to that promise? I mean, geez, like in American life, very little has lived up to that promise. You know, we've had, you know, there were a lot of people at Web 1.0 thought that it would lead to that. Also the truth is that the architects of Web 3 tend to be people who are deeply invested in the tech world, and if you were to line them up, they're not that representative of most of the world's population. All of that said, I'm very, very excited about the potential for Web3 and think that we need to hopefully build it in a way that cultivates better politics, better interactions, better ways of life, really. So you can count me in terms of being a proponent of the potential of Web3 to make things better. But if we let it just run its course, it'll probably end up being something similar to what's come before, honestly. I mean, you can see like one of the major investors in Web3 is Facebook/Meta. They're starting out with $1 trillion market cap. And their market cap is born in large part by serving advertisers.
I was going to say, this is a question and concept that we millennial meme makers would call meta. So thank you for that. Let's go to this question from Roger Austin. Roger? Roger, you're still on mute. Roger, are you able to unmute?
I think so. Thank you, Mr. Yang. You said early on that the system was designed to be dysfunctional and that you wanted to reform the system. What parts of the system deserve the most blame, I guess, for our dysfunction? And is there any low-hanging fruit? Are you including the founding documents in parts of wrong with the system, or I'll just let you answer as you see fit?
I think the single biggest ill that we can address is not in the founding documents, and it is closed party primaries. Closed party primaries are a disaster. They make it so that 10% of Americans essentially elect 83% of our representatives. It's going to be higher because they're getting rid of all they already got rid of 5 swing districts. If you had nonpartisan open primaries, that would alone solve not 80%, but like I'd say half the problem, because then instead of catering to the most extreme voters, you'd actually have to answer to the general public. I saw something in the chat about how if you're in San Francisco and a Republican, you don't count. You're right, you don't count. If you're, if you're a Democrat in Mississippi, you don't count. And so in those environments, it becomes purely rational to ignore politics. You should ignore, but you know what I mean? It's just going to drive you crazy. In large part because they do not have to listen to you. So if you had open primaries, then you wouldn't exclude a whole slew of voters from the get-go. And even if you're in the opposite party, you might have to listen to the person because their vote might matter. Right now, 83% of our districts are either very blue or very red because politicians don't like to compete. They think, hey, if I can just get through the primary, I win. Yeah, that sounds good because I'm pretty sure I can win the primary because I'll probably have a big money advantage and I just need to keep the hyper-partisans off my back. It's a terrible system. And there's nothing about that in the Constitution because the Constitution didn't envision or like political parties. And so they arose afterwards and now they run everything into the ground. So there's one change you could make is just get rid of the closed party primaries. And is that doable? Yes, it is doable. There are ballot initiatives possible in 24 states. In some of the other states, there's a very big case to be made. Think about the counter argument to open primaries. What is it? No, our party should run everything and we're great at this. I mean, it's a really weak argument. Like the counter argument is like, look, shouldn't everyone be able to decide and participate?
Let's go to a question from Brent Dennison real quick. Brent, you've been putting some questions about media in the chat. I'd like to bring that in here.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
I wanted to ask about the media duopoly because I see this reflected in my personal life. I'm relatively young. I'm 27, and I've always been very politically motivated in my life, but I didn't realize just how out of hand things can get in this country in the last few years. And I think it's really our duopoly of media. People are getting information from the red bin or the blue bin, and only that source. So my question is, what can young people do? What are the best tools that we have to change this, to revolutionize the way we get information.
Well, Brent, you're way ahead of the curve just by understanding what you're facing and you're up against. I have many friends who are in the same boat, and they say they get their news from foreign sources like the BBC or Al Jazeera because they think it's more objective. One of the things I would like to do is elevate some independent voices who can be their own constellation to counteract or provide an alternative to the red bin and the blue bin, as you put it. Now, that's a very big task, but I think that it's a huge opportunity. And believe it or not, I'm working on it. Now, can I execute on that? We'll see. But I think the need is so clear, Brent, and the fact that people like you have identified that need gives me hope. So hopefully we can provide media organizations that suit our times, that don't feel like they're just trying to spin you on a narrative.
Let's go to a question from Timothy Yeager. And then after that, I think we'll have time for one or two more questions before we turn it back over to Jeff. So Timothy.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been an absolute honor being able to sit here and listen to your wonderful discussion about so many important topics. For me, I want to be a future academic. I'm about to go for my graduate degree soon and make a living more or less discussing ideas and things of this nature. So for me, my biggest worry is the rise of cancellation and censorship on both the left and the right, which I definitely see as a huge hindrance to being able to objectively discuss these things if everything is so hyper politicized. So I guess the question is, like, for you at least, would be, how is the Forward Party going to tackle some of these issues? But also for me on an individual level, how do I navigate without feeling I have to step on eggshells for everyone I interact with?
Well, Timothy, such a great ambition. I mean, we need thinkers. We need people who want to be honest. I think if you can find an environment or an institution that supports that kind of inquiry, that's where you should go. So university culture and academic culture is very, very left-leaning. I think most people know that. And that there are a couple of alternatives that are starting to come up. I do think it's a very important question for us all to try and answer, because these cultures and institutions tend to take on a life of their own, and they are forming like the next generation of professional and thought. So my guidance for you really is to take your own search really seriously and try and find a place that might not be the first place you thought of. It might be in another part of the country. But I think this is a really important question that you should use as an important signal as to where you belong, really.
Let's take a question from where is this? Linda Williams. Linda, you've been sending me questions. Did you want to vocalize them?
Yes. I want to know what alternatives you've thought about to developing another political party. I've been working very local with that and have had some success, but I'm curious about, because I thought the same thing, we've got to have another party. And then I started working on some other things. I wondered if you'd thought of alternatives to that to bring the issues out as a priority in such a big way with let's create something new,
I love it, Linda. Let's create something new indeed. This country needs something new politically, that's for sure. So the first thing I thought of was a nonprofit dedicated towards electoral reform, democracy reform. Those organizations do exist. I think most of you probably know about some of them. Represent Us, Fair Vote, Unite America, some of the orgs that I've had the pleasure of meeting with and working with. But I realized that, one, they had that base covered, and two, people need a banner to join, a tribe to belong to. If you believe that all politics is tribal, then you need a new tribe. And so I thought that's something that I could provide. So that's where I landed. The other piece we discussed a little bit is I think that we need to have our own sources of media. We need to have billion-dollar organizations that are putting out the rational, reasonable, centrist, unifying messages that most of us don't see really in a lot of places. So I talked before about votes, media, money. Like those are the things that guide politicians. And so we have to try and provide each of those things to folks who want to do the right thing by their community.
I have a quick kind of a final thing that I'm just curious about because you mentioned the New Deal. And so one of the ways people have interpreted the New Deal is that everything in the very complex, diverse program that was focused on economic security as something that Americans did not have before 1933 and suddenly were able to have after that. And so were there to be a coalition for a New Deal and a comprehensive program for it in the 2030s, I guess 100 years after the first New Deal, Andrew, do you think there's any particular central value that we're lacking nowadays that all the programs in a New Deal would have to focus on as something that that this new program would focus, just as economic security had been that for the Americans of 100 years ago?
I know. I think it's really respecting our own humanity, that we become mechanized in our own ways, haven't we? We've all become transformed into these inputs into a greater system, and we even think of ourselves in that way now. When I was running for president, I talked about imagine being able to look at your child. I'm a parent. I've got 2 young boys, and say your country loves you. Your country loves you. Your country values you, and you're going to be all right. It's like, how many parents actually feel that about their kids right now, or can say that their country is going to invest in our kids in a meaningful way? That should be the principle. We called it humanity first on the trail, and it seemed really radical. But then if you think about it, it's like, wait, what else could you put first? You know what I mean? It's like money, like the economy, party. I mean, like when you start boiling it down, there's a need for human renewal, like a renewal of our common bonds. It's going to be a tough time. One of the things I'm imagining is like, are we going to be able to preempt disaster? Are we going to have to build on top of the disaster or after the disaster? Will there be enough energy to build the new things? But I can see the need very clearly. I know that a lot of you can too. There's a reckoning like coming down the pike, maybe even in 3 short years. And it's really an open question, what's going to come next. But I know I want to do everything I can to try and make this road as smooth as it can be. I mean, calling it smooth is going to be, like, it's not going to be smooth. There's no way. I would just like this rocky road to lead us someplace that we can actually be at least somewhat pleased to pass to our kids.
Well, we all look forward to seeing where it goes and doing what small parts we can to help along the way. And at a personal level, Andrew, I just want to thank you on behalf of myself and all my fellow awkward, useless, intellectual fellow young Asian American men who, in observing you, have realized that there is a place for us and our eccentric ideas in American politics. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Whoever resembles that, thank you. And someone who put this in the chat, yeah, Luke reminds me of Mayor Pete as well, but also I'm for multi-member districts because that's in some ways the fastest solution. But I just don't think that we're going to pass that in Congress. You need a congressional act. And so the question is, what do we have to do to start heading in that direction?
Let me turn the final say over to back to Frank and Jeff. Frank and Jeff, on to you.
Frank, final word.
No, I just thank you very much, Andrew. This has been a real pleasure, and thanks for talking to us today. And I really think, I agree with you that this is the opportunity. This is this could be a rough road, But as I've been writing about these realignments, like I think we're facing a realignment, and realignments are never easy. But when you get to the other side, you get a new rebirth system of reform, and I'm very hopeful that that's where we'll end up. So thank you.
Let's lead us in that direction. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone.
Frank, thank you. Andrew, thanks, everybody.